The Great Upheaval of 1946 and the American Dream. Introduction: a long and bloody prelude. Before the labor explosions of 1946 shook the foundations of American industry, the relationship between capital and labor had been long marred by blood, betrayal, and brute repression. A relentless struggle against the consolidated power of industry. In unfettered capitalism from the Gilded Age through the 1940s, industrialists treated the working class not as a partner in production, but as a disposable commodity. It was a one-sided cage match. In one corner, you had the working man, underpaid, overworked, and gifted with an almost immortal resilience to the tender mercies of industrialists. In the other, captains of industry, men who believed democracy was best administered from the comfort of a mahogany desk, especially if the windows overlooked rows of wage slaves in overalls to be bought off, bullied, and brought to their knees. The cosmic joke, of course, was that these titans of industry, these self-appointed guardians of civilization, had created a system so sublimely stupid that it practically guaranteed its own destruction. Like a man who builds his house on a powder keg and then insists on smoking in bed, they had crafted an arrangement so inherently unstable that its eventual explosion became not merely inevitable, but cosmically ordained. Chapter 1: The Blood-Soaked Overture. The corporate chieftains of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, those paragons of Christian virtue and capitalist efficiency, had developed a charming custom of greeting labor disputes with machine guns. Any efforts to organize for better conditions were met with coordinated, systematic, and often brutal repression. The plutocrats of this golden era, those magnificent specimens of human greed, had perfected the art of treating their workers not as fellow human beings, but as cheaper versions of their machinery, albeit considerably less reliable. Corporate power, allied with company-hired thugs, private security forces like the Pinkerton Detective Agency, and frequently backed by and the full weight of state and federal force, created an environment where demanding basic rights was a life-threatening endeavor, a pastime only for those who aspired to become history's smudged footnotes. If you, by accident or misfortune, found yourself organizing a strike, you could expect a bouquet of company goons, government troops, and the odd chemical gas as part of your severance package. This history is written in blood. Entire families paid the price for resistance. The Ludlow Massacre of 1914 stands as a chilling testament to this reality. The Ludlow Massacre, where workers seeking an 8-hour workday were given a firestorm instead. In southern Colorado, striking coal miners employed by John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s Colorado Fuel and Iron Company were evicted from their company-owned homes. They set up a tent colony, from which they continued their strike for an 8-hour day, enforcement of safety laws, and the right to unionize. On April 20th, 1914, the Colorado National Guard, in league with Rockefeller's goon squad, attacked the camp, with all the restraint of a drunk sailor in a brothel, firing machine guns into the tents and setting them ablaze, killing many workers and their wives and children in the process. Moreover, when the smoke cleared, 2 women and 11 children who had been hiding in a cellar pit were found suffocated and burned to death. This subsequent carnage, women and children burned alive in their makeshift shelters, was greeted by the nation's editorial pages with the kind of moral outrage typically reserved for someone using the wrong fork at dinner. Which is to say, none whatsoever. The deaths were regrettable, of course, but one mustn't interfere with the sacred workings of the free market. However, for the working class, the blood-soaked ground of Ludlow became a symbol of industrial cruelty. This pattern repeated itself with the monotonous regularity of a metronome. And if you thought America would move on, wiser and chummier, well, the violence continued. By the 1930s, the only things flowing smoother than union busting were stock market crashes and police bullets. For example, during the 1934 San Francisco waterfront strike, longshoremen shut down the waterfront in a general strike, only to be fired upon by police, killing 2 and wounding dozens on what became known as Bloody Thursday, as police discovered that longshoremen possessed the remarkable ability to bleed when shot. The incident galvanized the city's entire workforce, leading to a massive general strike that shut down San Francisco for 4 days, and ultimately secured a victory for the Union. That same year in Ohio, the Toledo Auto Light Strike. Auto parts workers, when sufficiently provoked, could be persuaded to fight the National Guard with their bare hands, and occasionally win. National Guardsmen killed 2 strikers and injured hundreds in a pitched battle that became known as the Battle of Toledo. The strikers ultimately won Union recognition. It all fell under that cheerful American maxim, "You're free to stand up for yourself so long as you're willing to die for it." Each massacre was followed by the same ritualistic chorus from the nation's moral guardians. The workers were ungrateful, the unions were communist, and the natural order of things must be preserved. That this natural order resembled nothing so much as a medieval feudal system run by psychopaths seemed to escape everyone's notice. These were not isolated incidents. They were chapters in an epic saga of class struggle, emblematic of a system where capital held all the power. By the dawn of World War II, despite some legislative gains during the New Deal, fundamental concerns remained outstanding for the average American worker. Wages were often too low to support a family. Workplace safety was a low priority for management. The 10 or 12-hour workday was common, and benefits like medical care or pensions were a distant dream. And labor was still often viewed by elites as a dangerous nuisance. Chapter 2. Profits, Patriotism, and Pent-Up Rage. Fast forward, World War II. The entry of the United States into World War II created what can only be described as the most perfectly orchestrated con game in human history. It dramatically altered the landscape as labor was muzzled under the guise of patriotism. The working classes, in this burst of patriotic fervor, agreed to surrender their right to strike, froze their wages, and worked themselves to death, all for the greater glory of democracy and the American way. In the name of national unity and the war effort, the National War Labor Board enforced a no-strike pledge for the duration of the conflict. The working class, with characteristic naivete, agreed, "For the good of the nation." Patriotic, yes, but also a cunning way for executives to graft "double profits for us, $0 and crushed fingers for you" into the fine print. The federal government effectively froze wages, tying them to the little steel formula, which allowed only modest increases. Overtime became compulsory. Workplace safety was sacrificed for productivity. Profits soared, wages did not. CEOs bought mansions, workers bought ration stamps and a quaint sense of betrayal. Meanwhile, the corporations, those selfless guardians of the national interest, discovered that war was the most profitable business known to man. While workers sacrificed their right to strike and saw their purchasing power stagnate, American corporations entered a golden age of profitability. Corporations like General Motors, U.S. Steel, and Standard Oil posted record profits, fattened by government and war contracts, and the blood of the working poor. Between 1940 and 1945, their profits doubled from $6.4 billion to $13.4 billion, a feat of financial alchemy that would have made the pharaohs green with envy. They bought war bonds with their windfall profits while their workers bought the promise of a better tomorrow. This immense disparity, where workers were told to sacrifice while executives and shareholders reaped historic windfalls, created a powder keg of bitterness and resentment. The beauty of this arrangement was its sheer audacity. The same workers who were producing the instruments of victory were told that asking for a living wage would be tantamount to treason. They were informed, with the kind of moral certainty usually reserved for religious prophecy, that their sacrifice was essential to the war effort, while their bosses celebrated record profits with champagne that cost more than most workers earned in a month. President Roosevelt's 4 freedoms, including freedom from want, felt like a cruel joke to men and women working grueling hours for frozen pay while the cost of living crept upward. His promised 4 freedoms eventually became 3 for the working class. Freedom from want was shuffled behind freedom from mandatory overtime and freedom from asking why the fire exits are blocked. All the while, corporate boardrooms twirled their mustaches and pondered how best to invest their golden piles of defense contracts without getting union scuff on the carpet. This contradiction bred quiet rage. While soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy, their families back home worked double shifts for stagnant pay, often in unsafe conditions. The irony was so perfect, so cosmically absurd that it achieved the kind of artistic symmetry usually found only in the finest farces. The workers, having been told that they were fighting for freedom and democracy, began to wonder why these noble concepts didn't seem to apply to their own lives.